That's gonna be good. That's what we've been listening to for a while. Moshe Storch doing Hallel on Hoshana Rabbah. But, he wasn't even going to make that recording. I said, Moshe, you got to do it. You got to do it because I need music to play in these opening 2 minutes. But we've talked many times that we should have this recording, even, not for our class, because it could be an album. And he said, you know what, let's just do it. And he had a bunch of microphones that day. So what we've been listening to was kind of the raw microphone footage. And now it's getting closer. This is like edited. I think maybe it's going to become an album, which would be so great. How's everybody doing? Wishing everyone who is celebrating it a happy Thanksgiving. Hoidu is Turkey, and it's a beautiful line from Psalms. Hoidu leHashem ki tov. Give thanks to God, for God is good. Ki li'olam chazdo. God's kindness is forever. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Thanksgiving evening. 2023. 2023. Stephen in New Hampshire, who will be watching the replay. Shandora in the Bronx. Sharon in New Jersey. Lucy in Minnesota. Bill in Mid-Missouri. Melissa in Great Neck. Bella in Florida. Guy in Ohio. Paul in the Great Northwest. Joseph in Massachusetts. Molly Litvak, our daughter. Shalom from New York City. Joseph, where do you go? Joseph says, Happy Thanksgiving. Joe in the Inland Empire. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida. Sharon, have you ever heard Sam Glazer's Hallel album? I've heard Sam Glazer sing Hallel. I don't think I've heard the album. I'll check that out. Ken says, yo from Philly. Over there on the YouTube side, Ella says Shalom. Aoife in Florida, wishing everyone Thanksgiving as well. Chaim in Florida, saying Shalom and happy Thanksgiving to all. Welcome, everybody. Wow, I honestly thought I might be alone in the class. I didn't give enough credit. Everyone is ready to learn, even on an American holiday. Beautiful. It's going to be an efficient daf. It's relatively short. Super interesting. We're going to be talking about if you own a place, who you're going to rent to, what if somebody uses it while you're not there. If you're an Airbnb owner, very relevant stuff. And something I think is just really practical even in the modern world. Even as we're talking about animals eating and trampling in the public domain, but we're getting at giving law to and borrowing from landlord-tenant law according to the Torah. Okay, we're on 21a, discussing mission number 3 here in chapter 2 of Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Page 21a, right near the top. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda sent a message to Mari Bar Mar saying, raise the following dilemma before Rav Huna. Does one who resides in another's courtyard without his knowledge need to pay him rent or not? Right? We went back and forth on that question yesterday because the analysis was sort of based on, well, if I'm not harmed because I had an empty apartment or courtyard that I wasn't using, I wasn't even aware that anyone was there or not, and somebody benefited from being there, right? Because otherwise, he would have had to live somewhere, but he used my empty courtyard or my empty apartment. I wasn't even aware of it, so it didn't harm me that someone was using it, and he benefited. But does he become obligated to pay me rent or not? If I hadn't known about this, it just wouldn't have affected me. And, there's different aspects to this question. One was the idea that, well, I might not have known about it, but if somebody's squatting in my apartment that I own, okay, maybe I wasn't going to go visit my summer house for this year or next year, the year after. But this squatter who's living there, is he going to take care of it the way that I would or the way that a paying tenant would? Maybe he's an awful person who's going to really trash the place, and my place is going to be very much diminished in value because this person was staying there. As we'll see today, sometimes it's to my benefit that my unoccupied apartment that was just lying there empty, that maybe I even forgot that I own. And if somebody moved in there, having someone there might actually protect that place from coming to further to damage or to almost like that broken windows theory, right? If no one is living there, no one cares. Vandals will come by, graffiti it, break windows, etc. But if someone's living there, that won't happen. So now it's actually a benefit to me that this squatter is in my house. Why should I make him pay me for the privilege? So these are the kinds of questions that are involved, right? So Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta said, okay, so if somebody's residing in my courtyard without my knowledge, does the squatter have to pay me rent or not? In the meantime, before he was able to respond to the question, Rav Huna died. Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said to him in response to the question that was asked of his father, so did my father, my master, say in the name of Rav. He does not need to pay rent. And he also stated another law. One who rents a house from Reuven must pay rent to Shimon. And the Gemara is puzzled. Shimon? What does that have to do with this? And the Gemara explains this is what he is saying. If it is discovered that the house he rented did not actually belong to Reuven, but rather it was Shimon's, he must pay rent to Shimon, right? This is like, hey, you want to rent my bridge? What do you mean, your bridge? And people used to fall for this kind of a scam. But it really could happen, right? So I have this mountain cabin that I hardly ever go to, and maybe I have a caretaker or maybe just somebody who lives near that mountain cabin, and they pretend that they own it. And they go down into that local town over there and say, does anybody want to rent that mountain cabin? And somebody says, yeah, I need a place to live. And so he starts renting the mountain cabin, and is he paying the owner? Me? No, he's paying this guy who's pretending to be the owner. Well, when it turns out that the one living in it has been paying rent to the wrong person, now he is going to owe rent to the actual owner. Obviously, the one who's defrauding him is going to be liable to pay that money back, but whether he can get it back or not, the squatter is actually going to owe me, the real owner, rent, according to this ruling of Rav Huna, reported by his son, Rabba. So the Gemara questions this statement. Did Rav Huna state two contradictory laws? On the one hand, he says that one who resides in a courtyard without the owner's knowledge does not need to pay rent. But on the other hand, he says that if it is discovered that the true owner of a rented house was someone else, and therefore the tenant was living in another person's courtyard without the owner's knowledge, he is obligated to pay him rent. And the Gemara resolves the difficulty. The second law, which stated that he is obligated to pay rent, is referring to a courtyard that stands to be rented out. It is an Airbnb. While that law, which stated that he is not obligated to pay rent, is referring to a courtyard that does not stand to be rented out. It's my mountain cabin. I don't rent it out to anyone. It was just going to sit there empty. This guy moved in. I didn't know. It didn't hurt me in any way. He benefited. He's not obligated to pay rent in that situation per this ruling. It was also stated, Rabbi Chiya bar Avin says that Rav says, and some say that Rabbi Chiya bar Avin says that Rav Huna says. One who resides in another person's courtyard without his knowledge does not need to pay him rent. And one who rents a house from the residents of the city must pay rent to the owners. And the Gemara is puzzled. Owners? What do they have to do with this? The case concerns one who rents a property from the residents of the city, i.e. the house is public property. No owners. It belongs to the city. So the Gemara explains, this is what he said. If it is discovered that the house did have owners and was not public property, then the renters must pay rent to the actual owners. Now, the Gemara wonders about this. Did he state two contradictory laws? And the Gemara answers, this second law, which stated that he is obligated to pay rent, is referring to a courtyard that stands to be rented out. While that law, which stated that he does not need to pay rent, is referring to a courtyard that does not stand to be rented out. So Rav Sechora says that Rav Huna says that Rav says, one who resides in another person's courtyard without his knowledge does not need to pay him rent. Why? Because it is stated, desolation remains in the city, and the gate is stricken unto ruin. Isaiah 24:12, i.e., a house that is not lived in will collapse at some point due to neglect. Consequently, one who lives inside an otherwise uninhabited house is providing a service to the homeowner as he maintains the house and prevents it from falling apart. Mar bar Rav Ashi said, I saw this ruin, and it gores like an ox, i.e., it is devastating. And Rav Yosef stated a similar idea. A home that is lived in is settled and safeguarded, while a home that is not lived in has no one to look after it and maintain it. So the Gemara asks, what is the difference between what Rav said and what Rav Yosef said? My Benehu, and the Gemara answers, the difference between them is with regard to a house that the homeowner uses to store wood and straw. In other words, this is the difference between this unoccupied property that the owner doesn't care about or know about. He's just kind of forgotten about it. So it's sitting there unused and uninhabited. So now the difference between what Rav and Rav Yosef said is going to bear out in a case where we compare the house being occupied with stuff versus inhabited by people. So if we say that it's better that a place should be used, okay, well, let's say that I have this mountain cabin. It's sitting there alone. I kind of forgot about it. I haven't been there in a long time. And somebody who lives in that area is storing wood and straw in my cabin. So it's being used. Is that to my benefit? Now, that's certainly different than if people are living in it. Why? Because if it's just being used for storage, that means it'll get a visit from somebody now and then. If people are living in it, okay, they're going to have, a close eye on if it develops a leak in the roof, probably they're going to fix it so they don't live under a leaky roof. Where if it's just getting visited now and then because it's being used for storage, obviously it's not the same degree of care. The house is not empty and desolate when somebody's using for storage, but nobody's living in it. So according to Rav Yosef's reasoning, a squatter there would not have to pay rent to the homeowner. So the Gemara relates, there was a certain man who built a mansion on a garbage heap that was belonging to orphans. And Rav Nachman confiscated his mansion from him, as he did not pay the owners of the property. And the Gemara asks, so shall we say that Rav Nachman holds that one who resides in another's courtyard without his knowledge must pay him rent? And the Gemara rejects this. No, there is no proof taken from this case because it was a unique situation. In that case, Karmanians, who were nomadic tribes, were initially living on the property, and they would pay the orphans a small amount for the use of the land. And when this man built his mansion, he removed the Karmanians from there. So Rav Nachman had said to the man who built the mansion, go and appease the orphans with regard to their lost income from those nomads. But he did not pay attention to the ruling, and therefore Rav Nachman confiscated his mansion from him. Now the Mishna teaches, under what circumstances does the owner of the animal pay for the benefit that his animal derived, right? So now we bring back to our Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 2, where we were, learning by analogy the laws of landlord and tenant in the sense that somebody was even unaware that their property was being used. Does the one who uses it have to pay him? And we got to that body of law by asking the question about animals here, right, and damages in our Mishnah, in our chapter, where the question is, right, one is not liable to pay damages if his animal eats produce that was easily accessible to it in the public domain. Right? Whereas if my animal ate your produce when my animal walked onto your property and ate your produce, then I owe you the full value of the damages for what he ate. But then we said, even in the public domain, okay, I don't have to pay damages for what he harmed through his eating my animal. But if my animal benefited from eating that food that you left lying around, right? Now my animal got fed, my horse or my donkey ate straw, and now I don't have to pay for straw or feed to feed my animal, then what he ate of yours, I have to compensate you for that because my animal benefited. Okay, so we're back to this. And so the Mishnah asked, under what circumstances does the owner of the animal pay for the benefit that his animal derived? If the animal ate produce in the public square in the area before the storefronts, the owner of the animal pays for the food from which it benefits. If the animal ate from food placed at the side of the public square, which is not a public thoroughfare, then the owner of the animal pays for what it damaged as if it was on private property, as the legal status of that area is like that of the private property of the injured party. Now, Rav said, when the Mishnah says that the owner of the animal pays for what it damaged, it is referring to a case where the animal turns its head to reach the food, but the animal itself is standing completely inside the public domain, and it eats while standing in the public domain. And Shmuel said, even if it is standing in the public domain and it turns its head to eat from food placed at the side of the public square, its owner is also exempt, as the animal itself is in the public domain. The Gemara asks, but according to the opinion of Shmuel, how can you find a case in which the owner is liable to pay for all the damage caused when his animal ate food placed at the side of the public square as indicated by the Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, for example, when an animal leaves the public square and goes and stands at the side of the public square and eats the food stored there, in that case, its owner certainly pays for what it damaged, as this area is comparable to the property of the injured party. And there are those who teach this law as an independent dispute and not as an explanation of the Mishnah. If an animal is standing in the public domain and turns its head to eat from food placed at the side of the public square, Rav says its owner is liable, and Shmuel says its owner is exempt. And the sages ask, but according to the opinion of Shmuel, with regard to that which we said in the Mishnah, that its owner pays for what it damaged, how can you find a case in which its owner will be liable? And the Gemara answers, for example, when an animal leaves the public square and goes to stand at the side of the public square and eats the food there. It's as if it walked onto private property, so it pays full damages. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak raises an objection to this explanation of Shmuel's opinion. The Mishnah says that if the animal ate produce from the entrance of the store, its owner pays for the benefit that the animal derived, as the status of a store entrance is like that of the public domain. So how can you find these circumstances? It is obvious that the discussion in this case concerns an animal that turns its head from the public domain to the entrance of the store, right? You're saying that the entrance of the store is like the private domain, but it's standing in the public domain? Or are you saying that the entrance to the store is like the public domain? The interest of the store. And the master says that the owner of the animal pays for the benefit that the animal derived. Evidently, for the benefit that the animal derived, yes, this is what the owner pays. But it does not pay for that which it damaged, right? Exempt for eating in the public domain, but you pay for the benefit that you derive. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak raised the objection, and he resolved it by explaining that the case in the Mishnah is one where a store is located on a corner, and it is situated in a way that some of the produce there would be in an animal's path as it turns the corner, and therefore the animal would not need to turn its head away from the public domain in order to eat the produce. Now, there are those who state a different explanation of the dispute between Rav and Shmuel. In a case where it turns its head to eat from the sides of the public square, everyone agrees that its owner is liable to pay the full cost of the damage as if it entered the private domain. When they disagree, it is with regard to a case where one allocates space from his property, as he does not have a use for it. And he adds this space to the public domain by leaving it accessible for the public to use. And the damage took place in that area. And the dispute is about whether the area is categorized as private property or the public domain, right? So imagine that you have a driveway near Dodger Stadium. Now, very typically, if you go to Dodger Stadium and you don't want to pay the $30 in parking and wait an hour after the game to leave, you might want to park kind of near the stadium. Now, the streets over there are all restricted because people from Dodger Stadium would park there. So it's illegal to park on the streets. But some people who live nearby will rent you their driveway, right? So it's a nice deal. You can get out earlier. They make a little money. Works well for everybody. So what if somebody was feeling like, you know what, I don't need to make money and I don't care if people park in my driveway. It's a solid that I could do for some stranger. I like to do that, you know? So I cede my driveway to the public domain for people to use. Is that what's actually happened? Or is he just saying, well, people can use it, but I'm not declaring my driveway ownerless. I'm not making it part of the public domain. I'm just allowing people to use it, right? So now what kind of an expectation is there if I have my produce in this part of my property that I've made available to the public? Do I have some expectation that if some animal comes along and eats my produce in that piece of property, that I wouldn't get paid for it? Or do I expect that I would get paid for the produce? It's just, I've allowed my property to be used as a thoroughfare. What is it? Let's keep reading. And this is what was stated, meaning this was their dispute. Rav says that in the Mishnah, they taught that one is liable only in a case where his animal turns his head to the sides of the public square, as this area is categorized as private property. But if a person allocated some space from his property and added it to the public domain and the damage happened there, well, then the owner of the animal is exempt, as that area is treated as part of the public domain. And Shmuel says, even if the person allocates space from his property and adds it to the public domain, the owner of the animal is liable as the damage took place in an area which has the legal status of private property. Maybe it gets treated like the public domain in terms of people walking through there because it's accessible, but that doesn't mean it isn't actually private property. And if your animal eats produce that belongs to somebody on their private property, then the owner of the animal is liable to pay for that. Full damages, not just to compensate for the benefit that the animal received. Now, the Gemara suggests, shall we say they disagree with regard to the question of damage classified as pit, right? A bore, the pit that one dug inside one's own domain, and then declared the area ownerless. So if you dig a pit and people fall in it, you've created a hazard, you're fully liable for the damages that occur to those people because you did that in the public domain. You left a hazard there. But if you dig a pit on your private property and somebody comes on your property without your permission and falls in your pit, why should you be liable for that? But what if you dig a pit on a piece of your property and then you're like, you know what, filling in that hole, it's too big a hassle. I'll just give up that part of my property and let it just be part of the public domain. I don't care, not mine anymore, ownerless, anybody can have it. But you dug a pit there, you created a hazard. Now you took your private property with the hazard in it and made it part of the public domain. Was it not your hole that you created? And wouldn't you be liable for a hole that you created in the public domain? So why wouldn't you be liable in this situation? Rav, who says that the owner of the animal is exempt for eating the produce placed in an area that the owner added to the public domain, holds that if one digs a pit or creates an obstacle that can cause damage within his own property, and he then declares his property to be ownerless, he is liable for any damage that is caused by the pit, as now that it is in the public domain, he bears the responsibility for it. Similarly, the produce is viewed as if it is in the public domain, and the animal's owner is exempt because he had produce in part of his property that he declared ownerless, right? So just at, well, it doesn't really follow. He's saying that he's still liable for the pit because he created it in the public domain. You have liability for a pit in the public domain. But he's not going to be, but he is going to be, he has an expectation of receiving compensation for benefit derived from produce that he left in this piece of property that he then ceded to the public domain. But why would he get damages for what was damaged there? It would only be compensation for benefit. But it says liability for damage. Let's keep reading. Animal's owner is exempt. I'm not sure. And Shmuel, who says that the owner of an animal is liable for eating the produce placed in an area that the owner added to the public domain, holds that if one digs a pit within his own property and he then declares his property to be ownerless, he is exempt, as he dug the pit when the property was his. Similarly, the produce is viewed as if it is in the property of the injured party and the animal's owner is liable. Oh, right. And the animal's owner was exempt before. Here, liable. Got it. Okay. Now, the Gemara rejects this. No, the analysis is flawed. Rav could have said to you, actually, I will say to you, now we're on 21b, that usually if one digs a pit within his own property and he then declares his property to be ownerless, he is exempt, as he dug the pit when the property was his. You're not liable for creating a public hazard when you dig a pit on your own property. But then you made that property ownerless. Why don't you become liable if that pit harms someone? But he says if one digs a pit with his own property and then declares the property ownerless, he's exempt because when he dug the pit, the property was his. But here it is different, because here the owner of the animal can say to the owner of the produce, it is not all in your power to bring your produce close to the public domain and to also hold my ox liable for eating it. And Shmuel can say, usually, if one digs a pit or creates an obstacle that can cause damage within his own property, and he then declares his property to be ownerless, he is liable for any damage that is caused by the pit. As with regard to the pit, granted, it is possible to say that he was not aware, meaning the injured party was not thinking about the possibility that there may be a pit there that could cause him harm, and therefore the one who dug the pit is liable. But with regard to produce that is spread out over the ground, can it be said that the animal was not aware of it? It cannot be, because the animal sees the produce. So the Gemara suggests, let us say that actually this dispute between Amoraim, sages of the Gemara, about an animal that turns its head and eats produce at the side of the road, right? We're saying that the side of the road is like the private domain and not like produce lying in the middle of the road, which is definitely the public domain. So, right, let us say that this dispute that we're talking about is actually the subject of a dispute between earlier sages of the Mishna. As it is taught in a Baraisa, if an animal ate produce from the public square, the owner of the animal pays for the benefit that the animal derived. But if it ate from the sides of the public square, he pays for that which it damaged, right? In other words, you are liable to pay full damages when your animal eats on somebody's private property, and the sides of the public square are treated like private property, because people would have an expectation that their stuff won't be disturbed or eaten by passers-by if they're storing it on the sides of the public square as opposed to in the middle of the public square. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Lazar say it is not typical for an animal to eat in the public domain at all. What's typical is for the animal to walk through the public domain. Consequently, the owner is liable for any eating that goes on there. So initially, the Gemara understands Rabbi Yosei's opinion as also referring to a situation in which the animal eats from the sides of the public square. And since this is so, it seems that the opinion of Rabbi Yosei is the same as that of the first Tana, Rabbi Meir. And the Mishnah presents their opinions as differing. So rather, it is clear that there is a difference between them with regard to a case in which the animal turns its head to eat. And the first Tana holds that with regard to an animal that turns its head, the owner of the animal also pays for the benefit that the animal derived, while Rabbi Yosei holds that he pays for that which it damaged. Turning its head, what they're referring to is standing in the public domain and then eating from something that we're going to consider a private domain, because it's either literally outside of the public domain and therefore in a private domain, or in a part of the public domain that is considered like a private domain for the purposes of these laws. But the Gemara rejects this. No, it is possible to say that everyone agrees about the law in the case of an animal that turns its head, either in accordance with the opinion of Rav or in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. And here they disagree about the exemption inferred from the verse, Exodus 22, verse 4, it consumed in the field of another, which renders the owner of an animal liable for damage classified as eating. So one sage, Rabbi Meir, holds that only if it ate from private property is the owner liable, as the verse stating the owner's liability means, and it consumed in the field of another, but not when it eats in the public domain. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosei, holds that it means that even if the animal ate from the public domain, its owner is liable, as the verse stating the owner's liability means, and it consumed in the field of another, but not when it eats in the domain of one responsible for the damage. Only if the animal ate produce of another that was on the property of the animal's owner is the owner exempt. Meaning if your animal ate somebody else's produce, whether it was on the property of the owner of the produce or in the public domain, the owner is liable. Now the Gemara right away challenges this, but not when it eats in the domain of the one responsible for the damage? What is the novelty of this statement? Obviously, no, I'm not going to be liable. Wait a minute. Doing the damage. Obviously, if you bring your produce onto my property where my animal is, and my animal eats the produce, why would I be liable? That's obvious. So if that's all it means, if that's what the Torah meant, that you're only liable when you're only not liable when when your animal eats somebody else's produce on your own property, then what did the Torah teach? That's obvious. It must be that the Torah is teaching that you're only liable when your animal goes onto the property of the person who owns the produce. And therefore, you're exempt if your animal eats somebody else's produce in the public domain. The owner would certainly not be liable if the produce is damaged in that case, what I just said before. So rather, it must be that the difference between them is with regard to the dispute between Ilfa and Rabbi Oshaya concerning an animal that ate produce from the back of another animal or the like. Rabbi Meir holds that one is never liable for damage classified as eating in the public domain, even if his animal ate from the back of another animal, which some would consider that eating from the back of another animal, produce laden onto some other animal, well, that's like a private domain. If my animal goes and eats food off the back of another, it's like he went into somebody's private property, and of course I should be liable for that, but not according to all views. Right? Rabbi Meir holds that one is never liable for damage classified as eating in the public domain, even if his animal ate from the back of another. And Rabbi Yosei holds that if it ate off the back of another animal, this is equivalent to eating from the property of the injured party. And with that, we conclude the discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 2. Now, Mishnah number 3. With regard to a dog or a goat that jumped from a rooftop and broke vessels while doing so, their owners must pay the full cost of the damage to the vessels. Why? Because these animals are deemed forewarned concerning to jumping. With regard to a dog that took a cake that had been baked directly on hot coals, and he went to a stack of grain to eat it, and it ate the cake, and at the same time ignited the stack of grain with a coal that it had taken along with the cake, the owner of the dog must pay the full cost of the damage for the cake, and he must pay for half the cost of the damage to the stack of grain. That's Mishnah number 3. We've already mentioned it in the course of our previous discussion, but now I'll go deeper on this Mishnah. Now, the Gemara infers from the Mishnah, the reason the owners must pay the full cost of the damage is because the animals jumped off the rooftop. Right? So I have a dog, I keep it on my rooftop, and my expectation is the dog's going to stay on the rooftop. But my dog is a little crazy. He saw something down in the street that attracted him. He jumped off the roof. And as he was falling down, he landed on somebody and hurt them. Am I liable for that? Sounds like, yeah. Why wouldn't I be liable for that? I didn't adequately safeguard my dog to stay on the roof. So apparently the Tana holds that an incident that begins with negligence, meaning carelessness or even an intention to cause damage, and ends in an accident, the one who caused it, then the one who caused the damage is exempt. As in this case, the owner was careless in allowing the animals to go to the rooftop, but since they did not jump off the roof, but rather fell accidentally, he is exempt. If my animal jumped off the roof, I'm liable. But if my animal fell off the roof, then what? Sounds like I'm exempt. And the Gemara notes, this is also taught in Baraisa. If a dog or a goat jumped from a rooftop and broke vessels while doing so, their owners must pay the full cost of the damage. If they fell from there, they are exempt from all liability. And the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that if an incident begins with negligence and ends in an accident, the one who caused the damage is exempt. But according to the one who says that in such a case he is liable, what can be said? It seems that the Baraisa constitutes conclusive proof against that opinion. And the Gemara answers, the case in the Baraisa is a case where the vessels were brought close to the wall by their owners, so that when the animals jump off the rooftop, in an ordinary leap, they do not fall on top of them. And the vessels broke because the animal fell and didn't jump. And since in an ordinary circumstance no damage should occur, this case does not even begin with negligence. Since the damage was caused by falling, the entire case is ruled an accident. Rav Zevid said in the name of Rava, sometimes one can be obligated to pay, even in a case where the animals fell from the wall of their owner's house. And you find such a case where the wall was unstable, and the owner was negligent in allowing the animals to go up on the roof due to the danger of the wall collapsing. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Is it because it should have occurred to him that the bricks may fall from the wall and break the vessels? But ultimately no bricks fell, and instead the animals fell. So this is actually a case that begins with negligence and ends with an accident. And the Gemara answers, no. It is necessary to state this law with regard to a case of a narrow wall, in which case it is clear that if, when they climb up there, they will fall. And that is why he is liable for the damage they cause by falling. The sages taught in Baraisa, I'm very close to done. If you got questions or comments, get them in now. The sages taught in Baraisa, if a dog or a goat jumped from below to something that was above and thereby caused damage, their owners are exempt, as this is atypical behavior. But if they jump from above to below, then their owners are liable to pay the full cost of any damage they caused because this is typical behavior, meaning foreseeable, should have safeguarded against it. Atypical, no one would have thought that would happen. So exempt. Now, if a person or a chicken jumped and broke something, regardless of whether they jumped from above to below or from below to above, they are liable. I guess because people and chickens are known for jumping up and jumping down, whereas dogs and goats tend to jump down but not up. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in Baraisa? Now we're at top of 22a. If a dog or a goat jumped, regardless of whether they jumped from above to below or from below to above, their owners are exempt from all liability. Rav Papa interpreted it in the following way. Their manners of movement were changed from the typical manner of movement for their species. The dog moved by leaping, while the goat moved by climbing. And the Gemara asks, if that is so, why are the owners exempt from liability? After all, they still cause damage. And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa does not intend to say that they are completely exempt, but rather that they are exempt from paying the full cost of the damage. They are, however, liable to pay half the cost of the damage because it's akin to goring, right? It's like paying half damages in the case of an innocuous ox because you have no history of the animal behaving this way, so it wasn't foreseeable. But if your animal did damage in the public domain to the property of another, even though it was not foreseeable, you are going to be liable to pay half the damages if the kind of damage that was done can be judged to be analogous or akin to goring in the sense innocuous in the past and not done, for eating or walking, but rather for some, impulse that overcame the animal. Okay. Looks like I just have a couple questions. Bill Eldridge says, I myself fell for this scam back in 2021. Somebody renting or selling you property that was not theirs. I thought I was going to be renting an apartment from one person, but the apartment did not exist. Thanks be to God, my credit union reversed the deposit and first month's rent payment. Amen. Thank God. And Joseph, in a Dafyomi group on Facebook, someone brought up a good question. Why would people be digging these dangerous pits in the first place? Very good. Why? Why? The Torah makes mention of people digging a pit, right? We know there was a pit that they threw Joseph, right? Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit. What was the purpose of that pit? I mean, one answer might be that they used to dig pits to hold slaves. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that was something they did, or to hold prisoners of war, or maybe they were digging a well, and then in the end they didn't find a well, but they left the hole there, and then somebody fell in it, or an animal fell in it and was injured. That's an example, right, where you would have dug a pit, didn't find water, and then lazily left the pit there without filling it, and left that hazardous situation that caused harm. Of course, you should be liable for that. That's what I've got for us tonight. A happy Thanksgiving to all who are celebrating it, and look forward to learning with you at our regular Friday time of noon Pacific. Have a good